Scott. Well, I think somebody else.
There's a gentleman behind there.
All right,
as well.
so I'll go in order.
So, Rick,
Jim.
Jim Mitchell, a colleague of yours from GISPIA, and someone who's been interested in this subject for a long time. Rick, what would you say to the argument that what you've examined here and what you are so insightfully analyzing and giving us these pretty good conclusions about is not actually what people inside the policy world have been worried about when they talk about evidence-based policy making. That in effect, the debate has really been over. It's been between evidence-based policy making and policy-based evidence making. It's been over whether or not policymakers are actually willing to consider facts, are willing to consider reality in making their policy choices, and not whether or not they're prepared to be guided by the conclusions or fruits of academic research. I'm not therefore disagreeing with what you said.
No, I understand your question.
I think the real concern, and it shows up in the Trump phenomenon we've been watching the last week, where basically they're saying, we make the facts. We don't care about what you call facts. We've got our own facts. We're doing what we're doing for our own reasons, and evidence has nothing to do with it. There you go.
So I understand perfectly your question. There's a paragraph in my paper, and it says, we are interested in good faith attempts to make good faith policy. So I am not talking about the intentional political manipulation of evidence or science, and I'm not talking about the political use of evidence-based policy as a buzzword to characterize a certain kind of political conflict. I'm interested in the good faith attempt to make good faith policy and to use science to do so. Your question is very important, but it's not the one I'm studying.
No, I agree. Okay, so fair
No.
point. Okay, thank you.
Scott?
Scott.
Thanks, Rick. I found much that I agreed with in your presentation, but perhaps unsurprisingly much that I disagreed with. And I guess I would start off by asking maybe a question that seems to be important, but I don't know whether it can be answered simply. There's a difference in sufficiency and necessary. So my question is evidence necessary for good policy making? Not whether it's sufficient, but is it necessary?
Well, depends on the policy. If we remember that in talking about evidence, we're talking about the organized knowledge produced in accordance with the standards of the scientific disciplines, and the empirical disciplines and so on, social science. So we're not talking about what a politician would consider to be evidence. Right?
Okay, so let me take a concrete example. You seem to be down on RCTs for reasons which people themselves who've been involved in RCTs have been concerned about for probably 3 decades, which is why we have multi-center RCTs. But let's take RCT as an example. Suppose you have a bunch of RCTs that are related to some health issue for which the health department is responsible for producing a policy thereon. Is that RCT evidence necessary for the decision making?
Well, the first thing to say is I'm not down on RCTs, so I don't know anything much about RCTs. I know enough to know the people who have written this work, have looked at the language that goes on around the Campbell collaboration and the Cochrane collaboration, and the insistence that RCTs are, quote, the gold standard, unquote, and said, no, we don't agree. We don't agree for the reasons I stated. Now, is policy necessary or sufficient, is science or evidence necessary or sufficient for policy?
Necessary. I concur. The world is complex. So clearly, and because science is prosecuted by Homo notionally sapiens, who live in a social world, of course it's not sufficient, and nobody ever claimed that it was. And the representation that anybody did is, in my view, erroneous. But that notwithstanding, my question is it necessary? Can you make good policy in the absence of scientific evidence?
It depends on the policy problem, I guess, Scott. So there'll be lots of policy problems where scientific evidence will be very useful, no question.
Okay.
Nobody here has said that the best knowledge is not highly desirable in policy. What they've said is they do not believe that if every policymaker in the democratic world turned around and said, I'm going to look at the evidence, and greatly augmented the reading of the scientific literature, that there would be a fundamental improvement or change in the way policy outcomes occur. The movement says the government has been indifferent to, hostile to, negative about, negligent towards scientific evidence, and if we all just got with this program, things would be a lot better. So folks said, okay, they say evidence is important, we'll take the evidence on evidence-based policy, and this is the result.
Rick? At the back?
The way you described it, there seems to be two divides, parallel tracks almost, with little interaction between them. And in terms of evidence-based, in terms of evidence-based science, one of the places when things like that being done and where it's specialized is universities. And then of course many people leave universities and they go get jobs. And those jobs are doing policy, whether it's private sector or public sector. So, what do you tell people, like in this room, who want to love to get a job someday, maybe doing policy, where there are these two parallel tracks, and what should they be doing? Well, if they're like in university, kind of prepare themselves, perhaps the idea that the kind of emphasis perhaps on the dominance of the evidence-based approach when I run up against a bit of a culture shock when they get to a policy-based kind of institution, whether it's private sector or public sector, and how they should adapt and prepare themselves for that. And on the other hand, what the private sector, the corporations, some of them I guess, and the public sector, governments can do to help bridge that gap from the perspective of students who are going to be out there looking for jobs.
Well, the first thing I'd say is I think the most important contribution that universities make to the broader society is not the knowledge they claim to produce, but rather the people they educate and send out to do jobs, complicated, difficult jobs in the world. I mean, I think that's where the real contribution is. When I first came to Ottawa in 1974 or so, I had a BSc in biochemistry and microbiology and a doctorate in the history of science and medicine. I didn't know anything about government. I didn't know there were 3 branches of government. I really didn't. I had that sort of impression that any person who hasn't really studied it about government, but I had to learn all those things, and I did. And I think that if an education doesn't prepare you to make those intellectual adjustments as you go along in your trajet professionnel, then there's something wrong with the education. So I'm keen on the idea that people who are in natural science or engineering or other technical areas could learn a little more about the professional requirements of what they do as opposed to the technical requirements of what they do, or the organizational context in which they are likely to work. And I think that on the whole, the schools we've talked about probably prepare you well to the extent they let you do internships or stage or whatever in the real world. But I don't think that the professorial corps as a group is very good at preparing people because they've never been there themselves as a group, right? One of the things we try to do in our school is to do exactly what you've suggested. And we like to think we've made some success there, partly because some of our faculty members are not exclusively university-based. I guess that's the best answer I can give. Is there a question on this side?
Patrick had one?
Rick, very interesting presentation. I saw echoes of much of my reading in your four categories. I would be interested in your reaction to the following proposition, that, going in reverse order, the reject and reinvent schools are populated for the most part by academics, and often not in the science department. That the reform school is a mix of people in academia and people whose job is to try and bring scientific evidence to government. But that the biggest single school in terms of numbers of people is the reinforced school. That is, it is all the people who do science, who do have training in scientific disciplines, and are thrust into policy game. Would you, is that a sort of characterization that would be logical from the way you read the literature?
Yes. I mean, the problem with the reinforced school is that they haven't read the evidence on evidence-based policy. They're not interested in it. They think they already know how evidence should be made. Kerry.
Hi, my name's Kerry Max, and since 1999, I've actually been in the reform/reinforced world within the Government of Canada. So I've been a policy advisor in international development. And my current role right now in the department is that knowledge broker or research broker role. Just to share some perspectives, and these are my perspectives, please not the Government of Canada's perspective. There is today, under this government, I believe, a real openness to looking at evidence and looking how to best integrate it into the decision-making process. And that openness wasn't there a while ago. Evidence in most of the cases in which we're working would be a necessary but insufficient input. I'm an economist by training, and I think you've captured the policy process very well. I look at it and I always describe it as you're talking about your second or your third best outcomes. You're never going to get your first best outcomes because the conditions for satisfying those first best outcomes aren't there. The challenge that we're facing, and here's my question to you, is I think the analysis that you presented across the board is bang on. The biggest challenge that I've faced throughout my career, and I'm currently facing, as we're working with Canadian Council for International Cooperation and the Canadian Association for Studies in International Development, is how do you create those sustained and significant relationships between researchers and policymakers so that the researchers can better understand and adapt, and the policymakers can better inform and increasingly be enlightened by what's on the table. But throughout the time I've been working in this sphere, the biggest challenge has been taking the advice that's come out of research and evidence gathering and presenting it in a form that was understandable, palatable, and usable by government policymakers. And the latest example I've got of this is I was just reading about the UK government What Works centres, where they've got What Works centres to look at evidence in 4 or 5 social policy areas. And the leaders of those centres, at the end of the day, say, okay, we've got some really great findings. It's still incredibly difficult to tell you what will work in this situation.
Well, I hope you don't think I have an answer, Kerry. Look, I make 2 or 3 observations. The first is, as long as an academic sees his future in the discipline in which he's been educated, he's not going to devote the time and energy necessary to build those relationships to make his work effective, so that the disciplinary standard of the academic entrepreneur as an individual who happens to be in a university but could be at some other university tomorrow and therefore needs disciplinary, needs publications and qualifications to do that, he doesn't have or she doesn't have the time to build those direct networks and relationships. Maybe some of the people in professional schools do, because their school, if not their profession, kind of recognizes the importance of those things. So maybe engineering schools, and certainly some engineering schools do a lot of that sort of thing, others do less. But it's possible in engineering schools, it's possible in a school like ours or a school like Paul's, where they're kind of terminal degrees where the students want to work in certain areas like your area or some of the other areas represented around the table. Fine, but even then, there are these substantial barriers inside the machinery. And I think the failure is to recognize how contingent and how complex the happy contingencies are, how rare the happy contingencies are. You know, it's taken as bad news, it's taken as raining on people's parade when you say all this stuff. But I mean, I'm in this particular case not reporting my own conclusions, I'm reporting the conclusions of the research, of the evidence on evidence-based policy. So if I wanted to do better in this regard, I would try to develop a hybrid career path where people's ambitions could be jointly realized in universities and government departments. And I think government probably has the resources to do that. I don't know if they have the imagination, but if they have the resources to do it, I think that could be a very exciting way of doing it. But you need a cooperative university. You need a university that accepts that as this one does to a degree, you know, but there are not very many like that, and we're convenient because we're sitting cheek by jowl with the federal government. I think it could be done, but it would take more imagination, it would take more commitment, it would take more money, it would take a lot more to make it really work.